Real people, real people.
Everything should be wrong.
Oh, the meeting has been recorded. Got it. Yeah. Yeah. Everything's on.
Are we good?
Yeah.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the second of our FR seminars for this fall. I'm Rebecca Montgomery, and I'm super excited to see all of you in the room. I cannot see all of you online, but I know you're there, and I will be monitoring the chat throughout the talk. This is going to be our regular meeting space. So we will have 3 other seminars this fall in this room. So get used to this room. The next one is going to be by Dr. Mike Dockery, who's out here in the audience on October 10th. In November, and I'm not going to remember the exact date because y'all know I'm bad with the details, right? Is Dr. Leslie Brandt, who works with the U.S. Forest Service. And then in December, we are going to have a showcase research improv. So you are just going to have to wait to experience what that event is going to be. I'm trying to think if there's any other announcements. Was there anything else I was going to say before introducing you, Kristen?
You can jump into anytime.
I think that's all. So I'm going to turn it over to Kristen to introduce our speaker, who is a colleague with Kristen on a new research coordination network.
Great.
Great.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome. I'd like to thank a variety of the folks. This is the FR seminar, but it's co-hosted by a range of organizations and projects. The MSP LTR, of course, is very much a part of co-hosting this and nurturing this. Our Center for Science and Technology and Environmental Policy at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs. So they do laws, right? So this is the kind of really strong support, and students are interested in this talk, so we'll be recording it and they'll be viewing it that way. College of Design is the home in part of our speakers, so she'll be over there speaking in the College of Design. I'm sure you're welcome to attend if you're interested in the built side of this life and this Forever Green initiative. So I'm looking at everybody and saying, okay, you, and the Water Resource Graduate Program. So a whole suite of folks are co-hosting the fact that you're going to be here.
Right.
And the title is Introducing the Urban Rural Systems Research Coordination of the Mississippi River Basin. Can everyone identify themselves in that title somewhere? Okay. So.
Well, thank you so very much,
Yeah.
Kristen.
Welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here in person and in Zoom. And I know we are all in the sciences and engineering and the design very good with acronyms, right? So LTER, long-term ecological research, FR, forest resources, right? So now you learn something about DICES, RCN, right? And ORSIS will come up later too. But this is actually a program within the National Science Foundation, the NSF, their logo is down there. Dynamic integration of social environmental systems. And so we are fortunate to have a grant with an RCN, which is a research coordination network. So this talk is an invitation to join us. And you might have admired the map on the side here, which is the eye catcher. I will not talk much about it, but you see here the dynamic relationship between social and environmental systems in the lower valley of the Mississippi River, the grid in the landscape, and the changing pattern, meandering pattern of the river, mapped by Harold Fisk in 1944. And so I'm an architect, by training. I'm a professor of architecture at Iowa State University, which is the state south of here. I'm licensed as an architect, so I built buildings. That was once my profession. But I migrated out in the world of academia, teaching sustainable design and environmental technologies. 17 years ago now, I'm a director of a center for building energy research. And I'm saying this because that path leads to the project. I wrote a book which took me 10 years of research about designing spaces for natural ventilation. And those are mainly indoor spaces in that case. So I also built a house with students, which is solely powered by the sun and naturally ventilated. And I'm related to a couple of educational and research related international bodies. But the natural ventilation left 2 chapters, one particular open as big research questions: the interactions of people with buildings when they're passively operated, and the climatic conditions in the urban context around the buildings. Both of those are so dynamic that they're very hard to predict and left open for many new questions of research. So an RCN is a research coordination network, a shortcut here to introduce that this is not my work alone. I'm the lead PI, so to speak, the principal investigator, but we have already members along the river participating, and I'm going to introduce the network, which is starting with a steering committee and hopefully growing into the various disciplinary and local realms around the basin of this mighty river. And we have folks in Missouri, Louisiana State, Memphis, and here in Minnesota, which is Kristen Nelson. And so the main topic here, which derived out of this question around the buildings and their climatic condition, led to the question of challenges between rural and urban systems. And as a highlight here, I highlight this with the map of the 2019 flood prediction of NOAA, which pretty much happened as predicted. Right, this is in southwest corner of the Missouri River in Iowa. Those towns were inundated with water, and that is an integration of how we live on the land by weather patterns which are common but also changing. Right, in this case, the snow melted here, the ground was still frozen, and the water flowed across the frozen ground in the Dakotas and landed all in southeast and southwest Iowa. So the Mississippi River here is this basin here. It starts, of course, up here north with, sorry, I start with the river in a moment. But so this flooding happened parallel to us getting a small grant by the National Science Foundation as design and environmental social faculty at Iowa State to bring a group of people together in Iowa. And Tom Fisher from the Design College was also involved in that. He gave a talk there. We call that the RURI, the Rural-Urban River Interface, the research, the reintegration of the urban-rural interface. And we were one of the few who actually, and this was a call by the National Science Foundation to ask, what is the next frontier in sustainable urban systems research? Where should we go? Where should we put our money? And we said we need to connect macro, meso, and micro scale in the urban-rural interface to understand how these systems are interrelated and how we can not just analyze those systems, but actually analyze them to change how they interrelate. And if you look up, we have a publication online, you can see all the different people who participated. There were artists from Minnesota involved, who we hopefully get back into the conversation, because we also said that those challenges cannot be developed, sort of integrated by scientists and engineers alone, which is the main focus of the National Science Foundation, but also needs humanities, artists, designers, planners, and community stakeholders. So this was our diagram for the proposal we wrote last fall. Pretty much around this time we started. And I think the fortunate situation we are in right now is that justice is a central aspect of everything we need to do and think about in moving forward. And so the program directors and the folks at the National Science Foundation were receptive to an integration of social environmental justice around 4 themes we developed. And I hope that everyone can somehow find themselves in these themes. They are also malleable, and we develop them forward from now on. It's that we have issues with urban rural land policies, laws, programs, advocacy. Some of these are moving in the right direction for a sustainable urban rural system integration. Others are challenging. Same for transboundary flows, where you have excessive flooding, as we've seen, low water quality. I mean, Iowa has big challenges, for example, with water quality due to agricultural runoff. And that leads to the connection between us here up north and those folks down, where all our nutrients end up and are killing the fish in the Gulf of Mexico. Heat island is a more sort of specific aspect of actually the urban conditions getting warmer. And then we have to integrate the people who are living in the land and in the urban context. So I am actually doing a tour right now. I've started all the way up north. And if the river doesn't really start anywhere, it's a myth, right? It runs off from the sort of the little hills up there at the Itasca. The Itasca is actually a made-up name, right? I don't know if you know that. The headwaters, Itasca, it's from Veritas Caput, right? Somebody made this up. Veritas Caput made it Itasca. The person who said that's the start of the river, but it's also so pristine up there. But then the next thing, you know, you drive a little bit further south, which is just north of Minneapolis, and you see Evergreen. I thought this was so cool, right? Evergreen is really the iconic container transportation between Canada and Minneapolis. And there is that long line of the railway going along the river. You have here, it's hard to see all the hydropower already in the river. And there are more trains, right? The very soon after the river starts in those pristine mountains, not mountains, hills, in northern Minnesota, economies are using the river, hydropower, logging, movement, etc. Right? And then you have all these beautiful sort of savanna trees around. I put this extract there for you, Kristen, right? And then you end up in Minneapolis. So I've sort of started to sort of navigate and observe also what's going on actually on the river. And this is just downtown Minneapolis, also power production, right? So this is an open network, and we have a couple of goals. And I don't need you to read all this, but the question is here to bring a lot of people together to actually discuss the challenges. We are living in a natural ecosystem. We have changed it completely between here and Baton Rouge and New Orleans. None of what is along the river is what it used to be before Hernando de Soto and his little gang of Spanish bandits came along from the Gulf of Mexico. All has changed. So we have to, but there are similarities, how those changes have affected the landscape, the environment, and how people interact with it now. So we think there is a potential to discuss typologies along the river in the cities, the big and the small, and identify commonalities and to develop something which we can all share and compare. And by doing this kind of discussion about the meta study, might actually find ideas how local solutions can be embedded. So we want to link a lot. And that's maybe where designers are fairly good at, link and connect and doing synergistic work. But also each of you in your individual projects, which you're working on, have data sets and have your own hypothesis. And we want to learn from each other along those cities and those communities. And then share out again with everybody else. So I introduce the various partners, and hopefully then we'll have some time also to learn more about who you are and what questions
join the meeting,
what questions you think you could bring to the table. And I see there are students here. There is a very important aspect of a network to integrate students, undergrad, graduate, put into some of the workshops, maybe through posters, through online exchanges. So there is opportunity. It's not only for established researchers. So that's, I see some students here. That's important to note. And so we in Iowa, who started from that workshop in 2019, and these are just sort of small snapshots of current work going on, but that doesn't mean that they are just the seed for more work to happen. So it's myself, Kimberly Zarakor, who's also faculty in architecture, and Janet Thompson. And we have a partner city along the river, which is called Davenport. That was Davenport in 2019 after that spring flood outlook actually happened. It's the downtown area. Here's the main downtown thoroughfare. So you see, didn't quite make it. Davenport is also one of the few cities which doesn't, bigger cities further down, which doesn't really have a flood barrier. Memphis is up high, and lower down, they have the levees. But they have the Nahant Marsh, which is another acronym. I spell it out: Environment Protection Agency, EPA Superfund site. And I don't know if you know what that means, but that means there's money invested in renaturalizing a formerly brownfield site. And that was a shooting range. So lots of lead poisoning of waterfowl. And so they turned this back into a marsh, which is one of the wetland features along a river like the Mississippi. Swamp, marsh, bogs, right? The ecologists know better than my architect students, but so that marsh is actually helping Davenport to not be completely inundated with water. And so there are opportunities here, and that is an education center for with the community college, and so they are one of the partners here. That is more on the workforce development side. We also have worked quite a bit with the city of Des Moines, which is not on the river, but has one of the major tributaries in Iowa towards the river, the Des Moines River and the Raccoon River. And it's all, Iowa looks so nice and square in the map, right? But all the rivers sort of meet the Mississippi down here. And so the landscape goes diagonally across the state. And we have done quite a bit of work in the neighborhood with vegetation, with urban trees. And just, this is our climate profile. It's pretty similar. We are just a little warmer in summer than Minnesota, but we're not getting as cold, but it can be quite frigid. And so we have challenges also that the inner city areas are warming up more. And about 50% of the inner city neighborhoods don't have functioning air conditioning. And this is actually, I just sneaked that in. We are just funded with another project here to actually help the vulnerable population with a localized emergency heat system, which will start in January 2023. So that'll be also able to connect that outcome to the network. I skip that. Dan Thompson is an urban ecologist, and this is a project which we got funded to develop hypotheses, to prove hypotheses that the local urban food system, if that is increased, like, you know, more urban agriculture, more food production in the close to the inner city counties, the metro area, can actually have a synergistic effect to the other systems, water and energy, and building energy was one of, not just transportation, like in shipping around food, but also that there's an impact through the climate on the buildings, which we will hopefully prove within the next 2 years. And Kristen is going to challenge that. But of course, not everything you hypothesize will come true. They might need more. And it's actually challenging to change a city like Des Moines to 50% local food production. You might not know that Des Moines is a food desert. Most of what's produced on the land goes out of the state, including the hogs and the corn and the soybeans. There we get our stuff shipped in from California, right? What we eat. So the idea is here to use what we call legacy models. So you know what a computer model is. Those are all models which exist, and to actually bring them together through mathematical computational systems to actually sort of develop what if scenarios. So from energy systems which are current, you know, current here, subdivisions, flooding, dead fish, big box superstores, big agriculture, transport food in, to see what if this actually changes. We have more local food, people can grow more stuff locally, more small scale farms, you know, more green areas, more sort of renewables, fish are healthy, water quality is better, and you know, more local food is sold. So that's one of the projects ongoing. This is related to the whole microclimate, which with my work started with the whole idea that when we have that the vegetation actually helps cool buildings or keep them less warm. And you'll be surprised that there is no simple solution to the energy model of a tree. So we do a lot of data collection here, how much evapotranspiration is happening with plants, also in the urban landscape, and then develop the computational models for those. Another project, Dr. Kimberly Zarikour, she's working with a project called Rural Shrink Smart. And while a lot of towns and cities, it's called the League of Cities, are mid-sized, we have a lot of small towns in the Midwest. And some are thriving and some are shrinking. And it's not quite clear why some are thriving and shrinking and some are shrinking and not thriving. So they're working with 6 specific communities here to learn what the people actually think about the value of their quality of life and how that can help other communities to also thrive. And so they work with the long-term longitudinal polling data from the Iowa Small Town Poll, and that's really sort of really small towns, like 1,000 people, inhabitants. And I think that will have a potential big impact for other small towns. Also, when those towns might want to grow or bring in new people, because you know people might move here from elsewhere because flooding is even worse elsewhere. And they also work quite a bit with community and workforce development on technology in rural communities. So now we move a little north, and I don't need to introduce the LTER, but just to give you the overall picture is that you have the fortune to think about the urban condition in Minneapolis and St. Paul as a long-term ecological study. Parks, trees, the river, as much as it's confined in the inner city, is an ecological system. And of course, there are others. Even a building can be called an ecological system if bats are living in my roof, right? Or mice in my basement. And so it's about the changing nature of cities and the social and ecological dynamics in the urban ecosystem of the Twin Cities. And this is the little bit I drove earlier today, right? And it's all kind of brown. Brown means urban, impervious. So we have all these impervious inhabited surfaces, which go down, shoot the water into the river instead of letting it sink into the ground. That's a big challenge for the flooding to come. And here are the conceptual framework layers. And, you'll see pretty much that, the topography is overlaid by the grid, pretty similar to the Fisk map, actually. And then buildings are built on top in the grid and people are creating their systems on top. So, as I said, we have our so we have Minneapolis, Davenport is here. Sorry, the writing is gone there, but Davenport is sitting here. Pretty much when you go to Chicago from Des Moines, you pass across this river at Davenport, the so-called Quad Cities. St. Louis is at the confluence of the Illinois, the Missouri, and the Mississippi River. Large history of chemical industry near the river and minerals, stones, metals, so lots of toxins in the ground. But here also you see this, I just snatched this from the net earlier. They had just an enormous flood this summer. The 9 inches, that's inches, yeah, 9 inches in 2-hour rainfall record. I mean, you can see the numbers, it's beyond what one can imagine. And so that infrastructure of St. Louis completely failed, right? And so it's not only the upper Mississippi River, it's also urban areas like St. Louis. Suddenly the rain decided to just stop over St. Louis for 2 hours. But our 2 colleagues, Charlie Nylon works for the University of Missouri. They use, and he's an urban wildlife ecologist, actually, so critters and bees and insects and all these sort of what's living in and around plants also. And so conceptualization of the urban green space is his current work, which relates very well from management intensity, economic input. We will talk quite a bit and need to talk quite a bit about economies of scale, economies of social impact. And there's a lot of outreach in his work. So how will future green spaces need to incorporate all these challenges is his question in this part. And also, working quite directly with policy and infrastructure management in this case here, how can these green spaces actually look in a neighborhood? Chronic flooding, right? And it's the infrastructure of our neighborhoods which is exacerbating the chronic flooding. We hear the same from our sustainable development colleague in the city of Dubuque, where the infrastructure changes have reduced flooding, meaning more green, more drainage, renaturalizing creeks which they have dug underground. So then Lincoln University is also in Missouri, John Zeiger, and he has a whole array of measurement tools in urban and rural environments placed along infrastructure, water, and I think we'll hopefully get a connection of multiple weather stations, weather climatic research in the region to connect all our weather maps. Because I think we have to observe and we have to compare and we have to connect all these various measurement tools. That's my hope, at least, and see what we can analyze from those. Our next current, and you'll see if that means you don't have to immediately work with somebody in Tennessee, but you'll get connected to folks who do work in Tennessee and can bring in their experience from, in this case, Memphis. Andy Kitzinger, he is a planner and an architect, the University of Memphis Design Collaborative. So here you see already, the planning department in Memphis is very much embedded in the local community. And you also see we have here 2 gaps, which we are about to fill. That's not out of ignorance. Arkansas and Mississippi have no big city on the river because that's where the whole meandering is part of the landscape. But we have colleagues in Starkville, which is a little away from Jackson. Jackson was in the news so much this summer because of the lack of potable drinking water. Everybody heard that. I think it's back up, but there in Starkville, that's Mississippi State. So Tennessee is Memphis. Memphis is one of the few cities in the Midwest which is actually built on top of a Native American settlement. That was an original location of a Native American tribe, and it's on the bluff, very wise, right? It's not in the floodplain. And so Memphis itself is actually high up, overlooks the river, but the not so fortunate lower income neighborhoods are in the Wolf River confluence here, which is the river which is a tributary to the Mississippi, which is here, and this is more the city down here. And so they work a lot with the restoration of the landscape around probably very toxic soils originally in the Wolf River neighborhoods. And cleanup, you see here, harbor, that's where it leads into the river. Wetland conservation, we'll talk quite a bit about wetlands because a lot of this part of the world was a huge wetland before settlement of Western settlers. And so development, still development, but also biodiversity and watershed management. So he is really on the ground working with the neighborhoods there. And he also snuck in 2 topics here. There is a large aquifer underneath the river, which is unfortunately not as strong as it used to be. They are working with how to keep that aquifer from being inundated with toxins. And Memphis, there was recently a study, is one of the cities in our river system, which is part of the cities which are really getting hot in the future. So it's the northern part, it's sort of in the sun belt, and you can naturally ventilate in Memphis very well in the winter. Summers are challenging. And you have a lot of low-income neighborhoods with very little tree cover in Memphis. And you know, Memphis has a strong history, the civil rights movement, the National Civil Rights Museum, and it was the site of course, that's where the museum is of Martin Luther King's assassination. So they have a lot of discussions always how social justice and environmental justice are intertwined in their city. And then lastly, we have Louisiana, and that is Tracy Birch, is our colleague in Louisiana. She is the director of the Coastal Sustainability Studio, and she was currently away. So I have for her just her beautiful title slide, but you see that there's the wetland and there's the transportation. That's a visionary image. The Coastal Sustainable Studio is sort of putting out there to see how we can also connect the more sort of hard infrastructure with the local ecosystems. And that is all of us currently who are who hash this out. We have a couple of local partners already on board. This is the Eastern Iowa Community College, I said, the Wolf River. This is Ryan Hall is the Wolf River Conservancy stakeholder. Katie is here. Katie is an energy expert from the University College London. She will help us connect to more international teams. Nick Jordan was here earlier for Evergreen Initiative using, and I won't say cover crops, but seasonal, what, you'll help me with the name of it. So there are it's agricultural ecosystems, eco-social systems in the agricultural fields. And they are studying life-sustaining vegetation in those seasons when there's no corn or soybeans, meaning the other 9 months of the year of the land. So, and many other really interesting ideas. And then we are connected to the, and this is another crazy acronym, right? Inspire LSIM, Lewis Stokes Alliance for Minority Participation, Illinois, Indiana, no, Iowa, Illinois, Nebraska. And that the rest I don't even know myself. But they are, that's an alliance to bring underrepresented minority students into science and STEM fields. We could not do this project without the Iowa watershed approach and the hydroscience team at the University of Iowa. They are actually currently leading the renaturalization of many watershed systems in the Midwest. So we have to talk to them. From the rural perspective, they are not yet engaged with the urban perspective. They are not drilling up parking lots, but they are bringing fields back into watersheds, which is a start. And that's funded by HUD, big HUD project. And then the Metropolitan Council here in St. Paul hopefully will support us with great ideas and feedback. We also need feedback from local community stakeholders. So I invite you to join. We have started by just saying we will have 4 working groups that could split up into 10 or merge into 2. That depends on how we develop this. But land use planning for urban communities and adjacent rural to reduce sprawl, renewable energy and energy conservation. We really don't yet talk about all these buildings we already have and how they are going to be improved and all these. I mean, I drove from St. Cloud to Minneapolis today and all that concrete I saw. Reduced transboundary flows is connected. Vacant land in urban areas. We do have vacant land. Minneapolis is fortunate to have lots of folks move in, but others are not so fortunate yet. So there might be also opportunities to keep vacant land for ecosystem services. And then the heat is a big problem. And all of that under climate change scenarios, because it's not going away. The changing climate, it's going to stay with us for quite some time. And so we are fortunate that we were funded. The start date is August 15. That's just about 5 weeks away. And so here, this is my first engagement with you all to get it started. And the first workshop will be in Minneapolis in April, May next year in person. In between, we'll have a couple of meetings. We'll have to discuss that still, how this will all work out. We'll have a website, a newsletter, all these sort of engagement, social media will come up. And that's my presentation here today. And I'm happy, I already see I have 2 chat questions. I don't know what they are, but I'd be happy to open for discussion and questions and feedback, conversation, whatever you want. That's it. Thank you. Yes.
What role is the MTCI, the Mississippi Towns and Cities Initiative, playing in this? Because there's this organization
There
for
is.
all the towns and cities along the basin.
We have to still get them involved, actually.
All right.
We have every of those local folks have said, we have to talk to them,
Right,
and we will.
okay.
But at the moment, I'm going to Davenport in 2-3 weeks, and I'll meet with some of those who can connect us with those people.
They're really active.
They are very active, and there's a lot of more. It'll be really interesting to get all the active people together, because there's also a journalism group at the University of Missouri working only in the Mississippi River Basin. Yes.
So I have a question about the role of water
Yeah.
in this, because obviously, you know, there's the river, which
Yeah.
is an organizing principle for connecting all the states.
Yeah.
But here in Minnesota, as I understand, there are lots of lakes. And
Mhm.
so when people adhere to the lake that they're around, and that becomes the organizing principle at the sort of, it's the micro scale.
Mhm,
Somewhere between micro and meso, as you were
mhm.
defining it. So I guess the question is it, you know, like the watershed, or is it the waterway, or is it, you know? because
Good question. Yeah, I know. And the Mississippi River comes apparently out of a lake, which is also not quite true because the lake is fed by bogs and by water running into the lake. So it's, you know, at some point there's a high tip, right? But the Mississippi River also flows through a lot of lakes before it makes it to Minneapolis and is more channeled, right? So yes, there are also lakes which flow out and make other rivers, and those rivers make it into the Mississippi. It's a drainage basin, the whole
So
Midwest.
You're saying it's an organizing principle.
The-
And you're just saying like all the water that's flowing.
all the water that's flowing, but the most important topic for us is the rural urban system. That is where everything comes together for us, and the water basin is the geographic locale in which that happens, and it's also along which most of the challenges can be tied to. Yeah, but I think I mean, we can also talk about lake communities, right? Yes, there was one question here, sorry, and then we can do the chats, yeah.
So I'm really impressed by the broad nature
Mhm.
of this. I'm curious, how does one bring the developers, the developments, or people, you know, basically real estate developers as major stakeholders that cause, you know, urban sprawl
Mhm.
to the table in this? Because typically development occurs first, then the municipality decides to play catch up.
Mhm.
Because we don't have enough water, we don't have enough electric.
Yeah.
We've created all these problems. Now we have to go and fix it. So how can they be brought into the table? Or if they can, at more planning, at an earlier planning stage?
That's a good point. So I will answer this by a question back. So what are the developers most interested in?
Money.
That's how you can get them.
Right, but the NSF grant isn't large enough to.
No, but no. No, we're not paying the real estate agent. But I think if you can not monetize in that general, but if you can put value on different types of developments, then, you know, might be completely optimistic. There could be some opportunity here to get them on board. Because, you know, if nobody comes to live there, where they just built their beautiful subdivision, because of, you know, what happened in some locations in St. Louis, they actually had to tear down developments again because the dioxin was in the ground. It's also not helped, right? And I always, when I drive along American interstates or highways, I put Kurt Weill and Bert Brecht's Mahagoni in my CD, because that city was built on money, and it only survived as long as people would put money in there, and then it died.
There's an online question.
Yeah.
Asking, what do you see as the biggest challenges in coordinating this project? Recognizing that coordination is probably a challenge itself.
Yes. What's my biggest challenge? I always have the challenge that I think, oh my God, I have a party and nobody turns up. I have, fortunately, I don't have I'm not afraid of this, because, you know, I've supervised construction of buildings for a couple of $1 million, and, you know, you start by building foundations. And I mean, this is more loose than a building, because, you know, I don't have to end up with a roof. I could have we could end up with lots of sprouts and different ideas going in multiple directions. And it starts from this seed grant to get people to think and talk together. I'm actually quite excited about the openness of this opportunity. When do you get $500,000 to let people stick their head together for 3 years, 3-4 years? That's rare. Without a very without a defined deliverable. All we need to do is get together and hash out research questions and write proposals and get people together and really challenge us to think about this differently. And I think that's possible. That's all I have for that question. I mean, yes, it's a challenge. And I probably, there will be times when I said, oh my God, I have 50 more emails and I can't, yeah. So I think that the biggest challenge is to keep it channelized in a little way so that we don't lose people. And we get keep everybody engaged. So I have now another question here.
There's another question, but I thought if we could take one from the room and then
Yeah.
take one from online.
Sure. And you have the onlines there, right?
Yeah, I do.
Wonder if you could comment a bit on the tension between urbanization and centralization and decentralizing. It seems that as we get into higher and higher densities,
Mhm,
runoff is a bigger concern, lack of
mhm.
land for trees and absorption, all those things go away. Urban heat island gets much, much worse with density. So kind of describe that tension and how we look at that and how we try to dissect that in the context of your project.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question because I think we have to be dense and let the water go down into the ground where we are living dense. And I have recently encountered a new urbanism concept called porosity. And I think that can go a long way if we are not only porous socially, but also for water, for air. And so I think we have been hermetic in the thinking of our built space for too long and not connected between the inside and outside. And I mean, I'm not saying the flood should run through the building, but if the flood somehow can run around the building without challenging the stability of the building, that water can help also the vegetation. So I think this is where design comes in. And I think data-driven design, thinking about what all these systems have in common, will help us with some of those answers.
You mentioned not having defined deliverables, but where would you like to see this project in a year? And what are your biggest hopes for the impacts of it?
Okay, yes. I mean, I have ideas, of course, for where this is going. And I didn't even say that to Kristen, but in the worst case, if everybody starts fighting and nothing happens, I'll write a book about it. And that'll be a great outcome. No, but that's sort of to the side. I think in a year, we'll have established working groups. We'll have really engaged folks talking together every couple of weeks, eager to scratch more dollars out of the budget that they can soon meet and stick their head together more and write. And, you know, hopefully there might be an opinion piece in some, journal of architectural planning from some of the groups in a year. That could be possible. And some folks might already write a proposal together. Yes.
All I can see, so as I look at the working groups here, I don't see a lot about policy. So in one of the presentation I made in 2019 down in Ames was the stormwater credit system that we've been experimenting with the idea that actually urban communities can save a lot of money by paying farmers upstream to keep the stormwater from going downstream. And
policy is weaved through all the groups.
through all of it, yeah,
Yeah.
because I mean, I think that there are some policy strategies that could unite urban and rural communities around water issues.
Yeah.
Have been explored in places like Washington, DC, but have not really been explored broadly across the country.
Yeah, and I think especially, I mean, I still remember your presentation because I think, you know, Tom was thinking also about different modes of parking, transportation. Yeah. In the case of more autonomous vehicles,
Right.
which completely will change the need for some of all these concrete.
Huge hydrological effects.
Yeah.
By a change. in
And yes, I think policy is, and this might be a new diagram we need to make. Policy is woven through all of these. Yeah.
There's an online question that I think connects to
Yeah.
that. And that says, are you focusing on Des Moines with regard to the state sustainable city question or also on other cities
Oh.
along the Mississippi? If other cities are also involved, are you looking at any pollution sharing scheme, tradable permit or other cooperative strategy between cities?
Oh, yeah, we are not focusing on Des Moines at all. Actually, that is a misunderstanding because that's the work we've done so far. We are focused, the five cities we have currently on board in working as cases is Minneapolis, St. Paul, Davenport, St. Louis, Memphis, and Baton Rouge. But that doesn't mean that they are the only cases. And specific St. Louis, what was the question
I
about?
was just wondering about pollution
Pollu-
sharing scheme, tradable permits, other cooperative strategies among cities.
Yes, I think that is a policy question again. And, you know, to your question, what would be an ideal outcome? Policy recommendations would be ideal outcomes, of course. And, you know, we have, hopefully we have more. We have also, you know, a list of folks who are already interested in participating from these cities who are embedded in local government and, you know, getting their feedback to the brainy ideas of the researchers can lead to something like that. So yes, I mean, pollution sharing, that's a great idea. I would be happy if we could decide, you know, on, we just talked about this earlier, you know, agricultural land is very little restricted in what you can do, right? And so when you just restrict certain communities from expanding, I mean, that's a bad word, right? Restrict is the bad word. Find a nicer word.
Incentivize.
From not growing, right? Up, out, right? So that would be one way of thinking about it, right?
Yeah, I want to think, I'm a hydrologist, so my framework is gonna come out in this question. But when you're thinking about water making it to cities, are you thinking at all about drinking water and overlapping with sort of other human water resource needs and how that may be quantity limited in future climates? I guess I'm just pushing the thinking on water a little further to not just think about when we have too much someplace that we don't want it.
Yeah, we don't, I mean, we are gifted in this part of the world with all the water we need for everything we want to do here. Although I'm actually quite surprised, and I need to ask, there is a lot of irrigation north of here on the fields. You don't see any irrigation sort of pipes in Iowa ever, right? So you must have less water here from at least this summer. Or different plants, but we are in general gifted with the water we need. It's what we do with it, which is a challenge, right? And I don't know the specific situation here in Minneapolis and St. Paul, but there's a huge waterworks and drinking water is up the river, right? Enormous waterwork. And yeah, you probably get the water from the river, right? Des Moines gets the water from the river and it's already polluted when it gets to Des Moines with nitrogen and other runoff from agriculture. And the city had no other choice than to sue the farmers upstream in the counties, right? So that's the challenge in Iowa. Here it might be similar or different, but I think the one it's the border, but I know it from energy. And you know, we have to develop an energy budget for how we live. We do the same with water. I think that's another challenge society has to face, that water is not abundantly available everywhere. And just shooting it down the river is maybe not the best idea. So reclaiming water, reusing rainwater, reusing water from the toilets is all part of the question. Yes, and you can reuse water from toilets, and that's what happens in the, I mean, you don't think you're drinking water which has come virgin water from the sky. It's all been through the waterworks 15,000 times and been through your toilet at least once.
I think there's a lot more that could get pushed by thinking about the sources of water to cities. So Des Moines is like a one.
Very particular situation. Yeah.
example, But linking the urban to rural gradients, and it may not be as much in the Mississippi, but other major cities, I'm thinking like New York, Seattle, San Francisco, they've all invested in the rural landscapes that feed to them because that's where they get their water supply.
Yeah, and in the West, you have a completely different water rights system, right? You know, there, I think the one upstream owns all the water or something, or downstream, I think it's the other way around. Los Angeles owns on the whole river. Yeah, yes. Open questions, right?
So thinking about, these are the places we need to go and coalesce around. Like this morning, we were just talking about, well, if we had two driving pieces that would bring us together, one would be climate in all of the, but it would be that urban rural gradient.
Yeah.
You know, not just sitting urban, and then you walk outside and okay, you're growing more than 3 tomatoes, so then you're rural, right?
Yeah.
And the other piece is we have moving people. We're gonna have moving people that are going to need homes here. And so we need to be anticipating refugees for a variety of reasons. Not just assume that, you know, the folks are gonna be moving away to the cities.
Yeah.
So thinking about a movement of labor, what's happening with labor in rural areas? How is that similar and rights and justice related to that? To urban areas? How do we give people a fair, just life in that production system, in that water? These are bigger than one afternoon for me or one lifetime for me, but I'm interested in people who want to come around a couple of key that I think would.
Yeah, and the group which will come together might find that some of this migrates in a different topic. I mean, transboundary flows, river system, green infrastructure, pollutants, nutrients, that's one, right? That's maybe very much from the Iowa perspective, because we feel really guilty what we sent down the river, at least those who have a conscious mind are. And, you know, water quality and water efficient water use is another one, which I'm sure somebody will bring up, and I'd be happy to entertain that. Good idea. We have a lot of hydrologists already, which is good. Energy. I don't have an energist. You're the energist in the team.
I think.
Yeah. Yes, online question.
This is actually my question.
Ah,
And it's one thinking about American Indian populations and indigenous populations that span the headwaters to the coast. And it strikes me that this river runs through all of that and has been for many, many years a connecting force. And so I'm just wondering whether conversations have emerged around that, around engaging those populations. If you drove from Itasca, you drove through Leech Lake Reservation, which has a major part of that headwaters region. And I know that in Louisiana, there's huge issues with relocation and movements as tribal people there are struggling with flooding and climate change and sea water
Combination, yeah.
rise. So I'm just curious about conversations, whether those have happened, whether
yeah,
that's something that might emerge.
they have certainly happened amongst the team, and we will use those connections need time, I think. And the challenge is, if you start this from Iowa, we have very few native peoples living still in Iowa. So we have to rely on our partners in Minnesota, in the specifically Louisiana, but also Missouri, to support the network in making these connections, I think. And we have some of those connections already. And I can at this moment only say we have to acknowledge that there's a lack, which we hope to fill with over time with connections we can make as we go along. I think it's might even be easier for us having this as a starting point to reach out and say, and make connections than starting with empty-handed and just say, you know, we want to do something. Are you interested? So I think there is certainly, and you know, acknowledging and knowing this connection is for me at least a start. And I do a lot of reading at the moment, which gives me some good, hopefully good background, but it's very small. But yes, I mean, ideally it'll connect, because those migrations have happened since and before. Right? One still doesn't know why Cahokia disappeared, or did it disappear, right? Which is on the Native American mound city opposite St. Louis, which apparently was there till 1400, disappeared before the Spanish arrived on this part of the world. A lot to figure out. But yes, I visited actually not the Leech Lake, I visited the White Earth Council, yes, and I made a little bit of just touristic connections there, but I drove through White Earth Reservation. Yeah.
Following up on that point, we're talking about transboundary, or organizations of people. I think there are also transboundary organizations of like commercial interests. So one of the things you mentioned, I don't do energy supply stuff, but interestingly, the energy supply companies are interested in demand because that helps them stabilize their supply. So that kind of thinking, the least cost resource planning idea is something that most electric utilities have been engaging in for a long time. So I'm just wondering about like things like Excel Energy spans a lot of Minnesota and other countries.
The MISO region, MISO region.
The American Municipal Power.
MISO, I think, right? We are all in that one middle American grid region. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's some opportunities there to think about the entities that do think on that sort of scale.
There are.
Larger scale. and
We're not
how that
Texas.
Filters down. Yes, exactly. That's its own grid.
Yeah, no, we that's an interesting idea, specifically with the renewable energy in the grid, where you need to
Well, but it's also, I think it relates to the urban heat island element, because if you think about surfaces and so forth.
But also about, where the wind is and where the sun is. I'm actually surprised how much solar there is along the river already, solar farms, right? And then south in Iowa, all the wind farms. So that is a different energy production system in the grid already, transboundary. And yes, we have transportation. We have all the barges going up and down the river. We have transportation on the rail. We have transportation on the ground. Now you make me think maybe the challenge is too big. No, I mean, we started with this, which is what we as a team know is a problem, is a challenge. There are others which you might or might not address. There's also historical challenge, of course, of the up and down migration of formerly enslaved people from Louisiana, Mississippi, up Chicago, Minneapolis, and back up and down and back and down in the around the 19th to 20th century turn. And the timber going down and the windows, no, the timber going up and the windows coming down from up here to there. And the cotton, yes.
I just looked at the clock
Yes.
and realized,
Oh.
We will not solve it
As
today. We
time
have
flies.
four years to get to some of these discussions one-on-one.
And things may ripple off of it
like any large idea, you just find a partner. You realize you have something you want to do together, doesn't all have to be coordinated and started for your
Yeah.
starts when the networks.
We are this sort of the spark.
Yeah, the place.
We gotta end, Jet. Can you ask at the end? Can you come up and ask personally? I'm sorry, I'm standing up here because I'm like, we gotta cut this off somewhere. It's 4:35. I am so sorry that I have to cut things off, but I wanted to say thank you and give people a chance to go if you need to go. And then I'm sure that you would take questions
Sure.
that remain.
Absolutely.
So-
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Thanks for being here and all your questions.
Workshop next spring.
Go ahead, Jet.
Yeah,
What's it called?
actually,
What's the call to action, says Jet?
Yeah, it was a very, very good presentation. However, like what is called, we have a little, what's called that?
Call to action is start next spring, start thinking
no, yeah, come to the next meeting.
in spring.
No, we'll do a meeting this year, we do some online preparation.
All right.
Is there a list we need to send our emails up to? Like, what-
Oh, that's a good idea. I have,
Oh, there.
you, can you be my organizer?
Sure.
Okay.
I ran city council races.
There, oh, there we go.
Right, okay, yes, if somebody wants to leave their name, please do.
Yes.